Hello, everyone, and welcome to Wedge Networks webinar on critical infrastructure protection. Our speakers today are Rick Holland from Forrester Research and Dr. Husam Kinawi from Wedge Networks. Before we start, I just wanted to go through a brief list of housekeeping rules for how this webinar will operate today. The webinar presentation period will last for approximately 40 to 45 minutes, followed by approximately 10 minutes of Q&A. If you have any questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to type them into the chat box below. We will then pose some of these questions to either Rick or Husam for the responses during the Q&A period. For those guests unable to stay with us for the whole webinar, a recording of the webinar will be available via Wedge Networks website for future viewing of this webinar in its entirety. Let's get started with a brief overview of the agenda for today's webinar. We'll start off with Rick Holland, who will provide his viewpoint on securing critical infrastructure. This will be followed by Husam Kinawi, Chief Scientist at Wedge Networks, who will walk us through critical infrastructure and machine-to-machine, meeting security demands. We'll then wrap up with some discussions and a Q&A period. And without further ado, let me introduce Rick Holland. Rick is a senior analyst at Forrester Research, where he serves security and risk professionals. Rick works with senior information security leadership, providing strategic guidance on security architecture, security operations, and data privacy. His research focuses on incident response, threat intelligence, and email and web content security, as well as virtualization security. He's regularly quoted in the media and is a frequent guest lecturer at the University of Texas at Dallas. Welcome, Rick. We're glad to have you here today to provide your thoughts on securing critical infrastructure.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I'm glad you're taking some time out of your busy calendar to speak with us. Critical infrastructure protection is something that's pretty near and dear to my heart. I live in North Texas, close to Dallas, and we're surrounded by critical infrastructure when you think in the context of oil and gas and natural gas. I've actually spent personally, between my time here at Forrester and as a sales engineer before selling in this region, selling in Texas and Oklahoma to a lot of the upstream, midstream, downstream companies. So this is an area that's, as I said, it's pretty interesting to me. I have natural gas, within 5 minutes of my house. So I'm very keen on securing of these types of environments. Interestingly enough, we actually had an incident here last year. We had a pro-environment, anti-big government activist named Anson Chi who made a homemade bomb and tried to explode a gas line near Plano, Texas. He critically injured himself, and just in March he's continuing through the legal process, but I kind of follow this one closely. But it's an example of the physical threat that we see to some of the critical infrastructure here. Fortunately, this person only injured himself and no one else. Critical infrastructure has a broad, it's a large set of categories. From Wikipedia, critical infrastructure protection is a concept that relates to the preparedness and response to incidents that involve critical infrastructure. Now, critical infrastructure, as I said, is pretty broad. A lot of my particular experience with it, as I said, is in the oil and gas and delivery of those particular, but it expands beyond that. It also covers electric, telecommunications, water, energy, transportation, wastewater. So there's a large number of components that make up critical infrastructure. And as governments recognize the significance of critical infrastructure protection, here I have examples of the U.S., Europe, Canada, Canadian governments on the different frameworks and groups that they have set up to provide oversight to ensure critical infrastructure protection for their regions. When you look at critical infrastructure, one of the biggest priorities that we have is safety, and then the number 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on and so forth is availability. The availability of these systems is absolutely critical, and it kind of makes us perhaps think our traditional security triangle. Here we have integrity, availability, and confidentiality, and as I said, availability is critical. But what you tend to find in a lot of these environments is, so long as that we're still available and able to do whatever that piece of equipment needs to accomplish, sometimes the fact that the network itself is compromised may not be nearly as important. We may see an environment where a compromised piece of equipment still continues to run so long as we can keep whatever service flow running. Not necessarily the best way to do things. It kind of makes our environments, if you think about them, let's Swiss cheese, right? There's holes, and sometimes we can't do anything to stop what's going on because, once again, that availability reigns supreme. And there's a number of challenges when looking at these critical infrastructure environments. The first one that comes to mind is that these embedded operating systems weren't built with security in mind. Much like if you think of the traditional internet being abused, because when the internet was designed, security wasn't built into that, and we see very much the same thing in these critical infrastructure environments, regardless of what the technology is. There is a huge dependence on vendors. Because availability is so important, we have to wait for the vendors to approve and bless everything. Patches can't be applied until the vendor has tested it out. So it's absolutely critical that the vendors have security in mind. Well, the vendors are catching up on this, so we're years behind. The analogy I hear a lot of times, particularly in oil and gas, is that the SCADA environments, the process control networks, they are maybe 5 years behind the traditional network as far as security goes, and that may be an optimistic number. And if you think of that previous slide where I had the Swiss cheese, right, our traditional networks are Swiss cheese. If you think about these environments that are even behind our traditional networks, that really doesn't bode well for the security of these networks. And then air gaps. There's this notion that air gaps are going to protect us, and a lot of organizations, I think, when they start looking into the security of these environments, find that what they thought was air-gapped isn't air-gapped, or that the air-gapped has some gaps in it, and it's not nearly as secure as they may think. One example that's pretty common way that things behind air gaps get infected is we have an air gap, but we still have to do some sort of backup. So there is an actual manual process where someone's getting a removable media and attaching it to this device, Windows device that has the terminal software that connects to whatever the critical infrastructure hardware is, and somehow that back and forth, that media gets infected, and I've had customers that actually have brought malicious activity into their environments through that. As you kind of move on, there's some other challenges that we also have to worry about. Because of the availability, the patching and configuration management are huge challenges. Once again, it comes back to the vendors. The vendors have to bless or approve the patches that go out there. And then what I've seen culturally within organizations is even when a vendor, let's say Siemens, for example, has approved a patch, there is still some hesitation to deploy that patch with the environment because, once again, anytime you're making changes to a system, you increase the chance that you may cause problems. So sometimes we're even very, very delayed after a patch has been approved for that specific environment. Vulnerability scanning. Vulnerability management program should be a fundamental component of any security program, but it's very challenging to do. Pretty much impossible to do active scanning within these environments. You just can't risk taking out one of these pieces of gear. I think about something simple like Nmap. You're running Nmap in a traditional network. You hit some ports for an HP printer and it starts spewing all kinds of things out. Imagine running an active Nmap scan inside one of these networks and what that scan might have an impact. You just can't risk it. And then the mobile devices are making their way into the environments. Here's another piece that might seem counterintuitive as well. When I've done consulting with clients, I've heard, well, we don't allow mobile devices into these environments, but there's no kind of physical security control that's causing that. And what we're beginning to see is a number of different scenarios. One is I've seen people bringing mobile devices into these environments, setting up hotspots on them, and then connecting the terminals, the Windows terminals, to those hotspots and getting the environments infected. Also have seen people that are just syncing their mobile devices. So there may be something that's on my iPhone, Android, whatever the device may be. I sync it to that Windows terminal machine, and now I've spread some malware there. So people will say mobility isn't having an impact on these devices, but that's not the case. And then you also have just mobility in the sense that some of the newer organizations out there are using mobile devices to actually interact with some of this gear as well. So consumerization is definitely having an impact here as well. If you look at some of the threats that we have to deal with, we've got hacktivists, we've got terrorists, state-sponsored actors, and insiders. It's I will say, if I think back in my, I don't know, 10 years in InfoSec, that these types of environments are some of the most challenging ones that you have to worry about. There's a lot of threat actors that are targeting them. The availability is so important, and the technology is not ready for security. What I thought we'd do is walk through some of the various attacks that we've seen on this type of infrastructure, and I think Stuxnet may have been one of the big eye openers for a lot of people in the space. This was after the critical infrastructure of Iran. Obviously, we know the U.S. is admitted to doing this, working with Israel on it. Opened a lot of eyes to people in this space, and then of course we saw Stuxnet that started off with mobile devices, and maybe that's how they made it through air gaps, or not mobile devices, but mobile media, but spread and spread across the globe far beyond where it was intended. If you look at some of the other types of attacks that we have to deal with in these environments, last year in August, we saw Saudi Aramco get hit with Shamoon, and they had 30,000 workstations impacted. Days after that, we saw Qatar-based Razgas get hit with similar type of malware, though they didn't release nearly as much information, and that impacted their desktops, email, and web servers. So these particular ones, according to the companies, they didn't make it into the actual critical infrastructure networks, but it certainly made it into the workstations that the employee use on their traditional environments. So this was really also as a follow-up, maybe a counterpunch, I guess, after Stuxnet, to kind of make people think, hey, this is a big deal. And then once again, kind of coming back to people think that things aren't on the internet when in fact they really are. In October of 2010, the U.S. Industrial Control Systems CERT, the ICS CERT, sent out an alert on Shodan, basically saying that you could use this web-based tool to discover internet-facing SCADA systems that have potentially insecure authentication and authorization on them. Not only does this open up brute force opportunities for these applications or for these web apps front-ending these services, but also many times these were running default usernames and passwords. And I just took a screenshot from a scan that I did with the tool just last week, and I covered some things up, but there's 2 or 3 organizations there that are mentioned. So this still happens. So it may not be a bad idea for you as a security practitioner to get familiar with this tool and maybe see if your environment has something publicly available that you're not aware of. And so you also see this kind of expanding on to something really recently on the research front. Just at Black Hat Europe recently, we saw a researcher from Trend Micro, and what Trend Micro did was they set up 2 instances of a fake water pump facility in rural Missouri here in the U.S. And what they found over 4 months' time was they had 17 attempts or compromises of this environment. 12 of them were actual attempts to shut down the pumps, and then 5 of them were attempts to modify the processes that those pumps were running. So had this been a real environment, this would have been an absolutely critical attack. So very kind of interesting. Should be very eye-opening to people. I still think, though, despite all of these examples, that there's still, within the security community, I think there's some awareness there, but I think when you get into the engineering community that runs these devices, they may not be nearly as aware of it as we are as security practitioners. In September of last year, we saw a Canadian smart grid application maker get hit big time with basically the comment crew or the APT1 group. In this particular instance, we saw attacks in the US, Canada, and Spain. And one of the things that was compromised was the software for OASys, which was a product that lets energy firms mesh old IT assets with smart grid technology. As there's this big demand for everyone to get smart grid set up for their environments, this is a company that they use that technology. So who knows what the downstream implications of this could be, but certainly a very big deal. I think if you look back at these threats that we've kind of talked about, it's very, very overwhelming as security practitioners. We have even less control in these environments than we do in our traditional environments. So we have to take a different approach to try to secure them. And from a Forrester perspective, we have this concept of what we call zero trust. It's something one of my colleagues, John Kindervag, developed maybe 2.5, 3 years ago. And zero trust becomes the foundation for protecting critical infrastructure. If you look at our traditional mantra that we have had in information security, it's been trust but verify. But we really can't do that anymore. Trust but verify is an antiquated concept. It's legacy thought, and we need to move beyond that. If you look back at old school firewalls, and I remember this, you have an untrusted port and you have a trusted port. You plug the internet, goes into untrusted, trusted is the internal network. That really doesn't work either. Really, all ports should be untrusted. We can't trust anything. And so basically, what we did at Forrester was develop the zero trust model. And the zero trust model has a number of concepts that we'll walk through and talk about how zero trust can be used to help secure these types of environments. And we use zero trust as our foundation, not just for critical infrastructure, but networking in general. The first component of zero trust is that all resources are accessed in a secure manner, regardless of location. So basically here, two-factor authentication. If someone is connecting in, if there is a need to connect into one of these critical infrastructures, that we're using multiple forms of authentication to get in. The next component is that access controllers need to know strictly enforced. So this would be our traditional least privilege. Those people that need access are going to only have access to what they specifically need access to and nothing more, and we're going to audit that access. Once again, as the previous slide indicated, we're going to verify and never trust, and we're going to use the network to do that verification. We're going to do two-factor authentication for them coming in, but then we're going to actually inspect the packets and make sure we're delivering clean packets and assume all packets are malicious. We're going to inspect and log all traffic. So basically, when we do have an incident, because we know that it's going to happen, we want to make sure that we're capturing the appropriate data so that we can reconstruct and understand from an incident response perspective what's actually occurred. And the final tenet, which is absolutely critical to this, is that the network is designed from the inside out. We've taken this untrusted outside-in approach with perimeter firewalls, and what we say with the zero trust framework is that we need to design security closer to the data that we want to protect. We're taking a data-centric perspective and getting our security controls and our visibility much closer than just the perimeter of the network or the perimeter of this particular environment. When we take zero trust concepts and apply them to critical infrastructure, you'll see that these kind of make a lot of sense, right? The network is the enforcement point. We have all of these endpoints, some of which are running Windows, some of which are running some type of proprietary endpoint solution operating system that we can't put an agent on. Couldn't get approval even on Windows in some cases, so we want to use the network as an enforcement point. Where we can use Windows and endpoints there, we definitely want to do that, but the network is where our main focus is going to be. From a network perspective, we need to have deep packet inspection on all traffic, including specific critical infrastructure protocols like Modbus. We need to be able to see into that. And I think a really important one is the transparency. We need to be able to deploy in a transparent manner. We need to be able to plug into a network with as least impact to that. I mean, even from a change control perspective, putting some type of new technology in, flipping the switch, lighting up the network, there's some challenges there. So we need to have as minimal of an impact to that environment as possible when we're deploying. Absolutely critical. And then there's a lot of lessons from a critical infrastructure perspective that also apply for machine to machine. And we see machine to machine within these environments, but we see them far beyond those environments as well. A lot of times people think, okay, we don't do critical infrastructure, we don't have any SCADA, we don't have any of these things running our environments. I always think to customers, well, your physical plant it's probably running, if you have a campus of any size, probably running some type of SCADA. You may not know what's out there, so I would challenge you to inspect and find out what may be going on in your environments. But when we talk to machine or this Internet of Things, it's even much more beyond the SCADA aspects of it. You know, machine to machine is kind of bridging that physical and digital world's boundaries. And these machine to machine characteristics, they're going to sound very familiar because they line up with a lot of these critical infrastructure characteristics. These devices, more so, I guess, in a lot of cases in some of the critical infrastructure, are internet connected, although that's changing all the time on the infrastructure side. These are custom implementations running proprietary operating systems. Very, very slow to patch. Security is not built into these at all. Once again, we need to rely on the network. We need to use zero trust on the network to enforce our security policies. As you look at some of the different areas that you might think about that are actually running these, transportation, right? Transportation companies doing fleet management, concierge services like OnStar, things of that nature. Retail and finance, of course, we know point of sales systems. Vending machines, more and more vending machines are getting, you know, smart vending machines, particularly outside of the United States. If you're in Asia, it's much larger, widespread than it is here in North America. Manufacturing, asset, container, cargo tracking, utilities. We already mentioned smart grid networks, smart meters. I just had a smart meter installed at my house recently. Healthcare, body sensors. Here's a really good example. I'm a diabetic and I have some type of insulin monitoring, and it does automatic releasing of insulin into my system. What are the implications of that connecting either to some type of you know, base station that's connecting to the internet? What are the security implications there? Or people that are cardiac patients with pacemakers and have a similar type of scenario set up. There's kind of some scary implications when you think about the healthcare industry. Physical security. You think about the alarms and smart cameras that are internet connected that you can go and see what's going on from a web portal. On the consumer side, more and more appliances are coming out connected. Home automation. I mean, this M2M is ubiquitous, and it's only going to continue. I think about how many IP addresses you have as a consumer at your house today. Have you moved into any of this kind of consumer electronic smart appliances? The washing machine that you can connect to remotely, and I don't know if it matters. Someone does a denial of service on my washing machine, but who knows what kind of things are going to happen. So kind of going forward, what are some recommendations for both the critical infrastructure and the machine-to-machine that we need to think about? Well, I guess one of the big challenges that I notice from the consulting I do with clients, particularly in the oil and gas area, is there's a lot of organizational challenges here. We've got technology problems, but on top of the technology problems, we have the threat landscape, and then on top of that, we have cultural challenges. And one of it is that a lot of these systems have been managed by engineers, and they haven't thought like IT security professionals. IT is trying to get oversight, but they have no actual control from an executive management perspective over these environments. So you've got to kind of overcome that. So there's got to be partnerships with these engineering groups. You're going to have to be a salesperson. You're going to have to build up rapport. Let them understand that you know how important availability is, but you want to minimize the compromised availability and get to secure availability. You're going to have to work with executives and work down the chain. When I see this happening in organizations, I mean, things like Saudi Aramco and Stuxnet help, no doubt about that, but it still takes time. Working with the vendors and the technology providers. You know, the vendors that provide the critical infrastructure solutions, as I said, are coming on board. I hear Siemens, you know, doing more and more on their front for some of the process control things, but it takes time. So what I encourage people to do is to reach out to their vendors, find out what their security roadmaps are, let them know that that's important to you, and then work with your technology vendors where you have a Windows machine that you could do application whitelisting on within the environment. You look into that. So where you do have the Windows footprint in these environments, try to see what security you can use with some of your existing technology partners. From additional resources perspective, there's a couple of things that I wanted to point out that you could go and look at, and this is on the critical infrastructure side. NIST has their ICS guidelines. Now these are dated, but nonetheless, there's some good things to take a look at there. SANS, I like the SANS critical security controls. Take a look at these. These are really good to take a look at. NERC SIP version 5, which is actually is in review right now, is another one that you can take a look at. NERC's got a lot of good resources out there. So there's a lot of things that you can go and look at to try to understand, particularly if you're a security person that hasn't come up in these environments, or you're new to these types of verticals. There's a lot of resources out there that you can use. And with that, I think I'll go ahead and hand it back over to the Wedge team to kind of continue with their piece of the webcast.
Hey, thanks, Rick. We'll continue this webinar with Husam Kinawi of Wedge Networks, who presents some thoughts on critical infrastructure and machine-to-machine meeting security demands. Husam is a long-term security and network technology entrepreneur with several startups under his belt. He's one of the original founders of Wedge Networks and functions today as our chief scientist. Husam is an innovator with more than 17 years of research and development experience working in the areas of distributed information systems, embedded applications, and wireless internet solutions. He's been a guest speaker at numerous major conferences, has published several research papers, and is the holder of multiple patents in the area of mobile and wireless devices. So without further ado, let's introduce Husam Kinawi.
Thanks very much for the introduction, Chris, and thanks for a brilliant presentation, Rick here. A very good day, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure to be here talking to you about critical infrastructure security. In the next 10 minutes, I plan to speak to you about how we see critical infrastructure security and its importance to our day-to-day lives. I'm going to give you a quick introduction about our company, Wedge Networks, and the changing landscape of critical infrastructure. I'm going to also spend the bulk of my presentation time today speaking about security solutions and how we can help address these security concerns, our security vision for ICS SCADA systems in 2018 and the future, and then wrap up with a discussion and Q&A session. So in a nutshell, when it comes to critical infrastructure, this is how we see it. Critical infrastructure is the backbone of our nation's economy, security, and health. And if really any damage is to happen to these assets, systems, and networks, whether it's physical or virtual, the blow would be so destructive and could have a debilitating effect on the security and national economy. Critical infrastructure, as we see it, are systems that are so important and so vital, such as the traffic control system, transportation system, the water system, the power system. They cannot go down. And in a nutshell, you can't also touch them, and they are highly insecure. So our approach to these systems is to how to provide and create a secure network for these unsecured devices. A quick overview of our company. We're actually a leading security vendor providing analytics and security solutions to large network operators. We have launched our products in 2008, and to date, we're very proud to have nearly 18 million devices protected by our solutions. We do have critical infrastructure security background, both as actually developers of technologies, ICS and SCADA technologies, as well as providers of solutions, security solutions in that space. And you can find our solutions being deployed in several oil and gas operations in the MENA and Canadian region. So what is our vision and mission when it comes to security and internet security in general, and internet security specifically to critical infrastructure? The way we see it is simply as follows. In developing countries, like where I grew up in Africa, we used to start our day by boiling water. But when we moved to the UK, it was such a great experience being able to open up the tap and see clean water coming out. That's what internet traffic should be. It should be clean from the source. And the way we deliver this kind of approach is by having systems that are easy to integrate, open to include other security systems, but also have the accuracy and performance to provide secure networks for unsecured devices. So why is security such a big topic for critical infrastructure? Well, as you can see how critical infrastructure has developed from being mainframe based to being PC based to WAN-based, where we do have these systems communicating over public networks. It's like you had a vehicle that was oiled, delivering a good function, a good service, but then suddenly you put it on the highway, and then suddenly you have threats from all the surrounding traffic, the big vehicles on the road, and so on. In a nutshell, when it comes to securing critical infrastructure, you have to basically, like this picture speaks, you have to have this like motorcade approach to it. You have to have all of the surrounding measures to secure what's important without touching that thing that's important. That's the approach, and that's what we mean by securing the networks for these unsecure devices. So how do we deliver our solution? What do we have to offer in this space? In a nutshell, that's what we do. We have security module, the reporting module, the policy management and escalation modules, all of which deliver on the zero trust network approach that Rick spoke to early in the morning. But more importantly is how to deliver these solutions in such a way that you do not increase the capital expenditure, and that's where the consolidation of having all of these different elements consolidated together, easily integrated in your solution, and also provided through a unified approach, allowing you to have a complete view, global view of your security systems. Let me speak more about how we need security compliance. The modules we have, the security reporting, the policy management, and escalation, are focused to deliver on the 3 areas of compliance: 003, 005, 007, and 008, actually 4 to be precise. And while we provide the ability to provide the processes to support the other compliance requirements, this is our laser focus, allowing you to deliver the security management, the typical electronic perimeter security, as well as the system security and incident reporting and planning. Now, when it comes to security, when talking to the critical infrastructure operators and providers, usually they have these 3 areas. They report to us that these are the 3 areas they see as a concern, whether it's patching, vulnerabilities, and attacks, and how can we basically ensure that these areas are addressed in such a way to prevent outages and failures. And we have the solutions to deliver on those, which is the Wedge pre-patching module, the trusted instruction module, and the intelligence module, which I'll speak to later on. So the modules we have provide what we call as the holistic network security. It's not device-centric. Again, bring you back to the example of the motorcade example. You want to provide the security around the components without in any way attaching to the components, which is the approach we do. In the pre-patching module, what we do is we prevent you from having to continuously pre-patch your Windows NT or your old Windows ICS-based system. And what we do is that we provide the module addresses the vulnerabilities that would have been addressed if you would have done the patching yourself. So in a lot of ways, think of it as a patch and apply the network system, allowing you to quickly patch a system and also provide patch management. The trusted instructions module is quite important in such that it allows you to define what parameters and inspect what parameters are being delivered to these ICS systems. So what we do is we look at the reputation of the sender, we look at the behavior of the content of the command that's going through, as well as we will look at and inspect the different parameters if you had specified through your typical regular expression what kind of parameters are allowed to go through. The wedge intelligence is very important because it addresses what we are seeing more and more of, which is what we call as targeted zero-day attacks. Recent examples such as Aramco and Rasgas, which were attacked by Shamon, and also Stuxnet, provides us the insight that we have to have what we call as real-time sandboxing, ability to simulate the behavior of the content before it gets delivered, and also provide threat learning such that if we are to see an outbreak at a certain instance, we can propagate it very quickly to the other instances of the system and integrate with threat databases out there. Policy management and escalation is quite an important part of security, as as you would recall from Rick's presentation this morning, when it comes to the ability to have everything completely audited and everything to be role-based, we also do see that there is the need to have role definition, not just for the users, but also for the different security elements, such that you can drop the element into the field, and when it activates, will talk to the role and identity manager and self-provision. The alerts and reporter are important to allow for event notification and escalation, and I'll speak about these further here. In the two modules we have, the role and identity manager, we define roles for everything, the users and also security elements. The users basically would mean that you can have the typical role-based policies to allow the users of different groups to have certain credentials and have certain permissions, while on the elements to allow them to be self and remote provisioned from the field. The alerts and reports is quite important because a typical SCADA or ICS system does have its own event notification and alert framework, and it's very important to dovetail into that framework to avoid any kind of redundancy. But more importantly is to provide a scheme through which these alerts and notifications are escalated to a security professional for immediate remediation, and that's what these two modules would offer. We call it basically the typical approach of having defined rules for each of the user and security elements and chatty disclosure, which what most systems out there would do today. Now, it's good to have all of these security modules, but what's more important is the approach to deploy them, and we have spent a lot of effort ensuring that our systems and modules can integrate easily to work within existing infrastructure and existing systems, are consolidated so that you don't have different pieces here and there, so you can do more with less, but more importantly are unified to provide the correlation and understanding of the different events and things happening with your system. On the consolidation side, if you look at the left-hand side of the slide, you'll find that your security system has to protect against things such as your typical zero-day attacks, such as Stuxnet and Shannon, your typical configuration attacks, all the way down to things such as hardware tinkering, or public access threats, because some of your systems are going on public communication networks, such as your telcos network. And on the right-hand side, how we address some of these threats, both from a low level, connection level, and content level. And in the middle here, basically, is how all of our systems consolidate together so that you can have this complete, comprehensive, consolidated security provided at a minimum cost of entry without having to deal with different components all over this place. We believe that consolidation is quite important. That's what we have done to our solutions. And the next slide is the integration. And in a nutshell, when it comes to integration, our customers have always told us that these security systems for critical infrastructure have to be so easy to deploy, to the extent that you don't want to have a security professional at the field deploying them. In a nutshell, you would like to have someone, a technician, going in, attach the product, power up the product, plug in the network cables, walk away, and these elements, as they woke up or as they start getting activated, can remotely talk to the Wedge role and identity manager, download the provisioning, and work with your existing infrastructure, reducing any kind of complexity, but also allowing for central management and providing, zero impact to the reliability and safety of your systems. Unification is a big thing when it comes to critical infrastructure protection. We believe it has to be the same system that with different talking parts all across the network. So whether it becomes the software that would deploy in the industrial units that would work at the control network across your quote-unquote virtual air gap, to the systems that would be on your site networks, all the way to the systems that are available so that someone can remotely monitor your SCADA ICS infrastructure, giving you this kind of unification so that you can have a central management and a central reporting, being able to correlate all of these events down from the control network side all the way to an operator and what they can do. That's quite important. That's what we have focused on in delivering our systems. So what's the future holding? Well, I personally see the cloud playing an important role going forward. Communication infrastructure is a given because of the fact that you would probably use M2M systems in most of your communicating infrastructure. So that's moving to the cloud. The alerts and escalation, just because of the nature of the people who have to respond to the alerts, the availability of text gateways, compliance, and so on. So that's also moving there. Reporting is sort of a given as well, simply because of all of these logging providers out there, the cost of reporting and logging and so on. When it comes to the ICS business logic, well, maybe not. Maybe you'd like to still keep some of this in-house, but even then, you're probably going to look at things such as virtualization technology. Regardless, at the end of the day, you have to have a new model for providing critical infrastructure security. And we believe, again, if we relate it back again to the beginning of this presentation, ICS and SCADA systems will continue to be highly insecure. They're so important, you cannot allow them to go down. You can't touch them, you don't want to touch them. And with our solution, we basically have this to be true on the device level, but false at the network level. And simply because we work with the existing networks, personnel, and processes to increase the security of these networks as a whole, providing you security compliance, reducing capital expenditure, but more importantly is creating secure networks for these unsecure devices. Look forward to working with you. Now, over to you, Chris.
Perfect. Thanks, Husam. So that's wrapping up the wedges portion of this webinar, and let's go to our Q&A now. During the webinar, we had a couple of questions come through. I'll throw this out to Rick or Husam. First question was, how do these solutions work with our existing systems? Who wants to take that?
Husam, do you want to take that as
Why not?
from a technology perspective, how you guys would overlay with it?
Yeah. First of all, if you notice in one of the slides I spoke to, we believe that these solutions have to be transparently installed. You have to be able to install them transparently without having to re-architect your network. That's the last thing any CIP operator out there would like to hear. And then the second thing, you have to have what I call as the comprehensive threat intelligence, because at the end of the day, you will be faced with threats from both the enterprise side as well as targeted threats targeted at your critical infrastructure. That is basically the two tenets we see, and then as you deploy the solutions, you can start now customizing them, adding more intelligence to the solution, like in our case, enabling the trusted instruction feature. That's something that we like to see with our installations. But I think the most important premise is what also Rick spoke to, is the zero trust zones. We believe that you need to go in and have a good understanding of what is very critical for you, and you build a zone around it, and that's definitely the starting point from there. Does that answer your question, Rick?
Well, I think that was a pretty good answer for that. Next question I guess we'll take is, what changes need to happen to implement these solutions?
I can kind of start off with a pass on it, and it will actually, I think you'll see a theme that kind of builds on top of what Husam said and what I said before is, ideally put these solutions in, especially if you already have an existing solution in your environment that's maybe not meeting your needs, is the ability to deploy transparently with as little impact to the environment as possible is great. So it makes the changing easier. You can test something out, demonstrate the value of it without putting the organization at risk or having to go through a real lengthy change control process. Once again, coming back to the availability being absolutely important. So, from a layering in the technology perspective, which I'm not sure if that's where the question was coming from or not, but at least that's kind of how I see it, is ideally this type of solution we need to be able to put in with as minimal impact as possible and as little change to the footprint of the environment as possible.
Any thoughts from you, Husam?
I would totally agree with Rick on this one. You have to appreciate, and this is more targeted at our peers in the infosec industry. The fact is, if you are, for example, a power plant, the last thing you want to do is to pull down some generators or some transformers, whatever you have, just to implement a security solution. It has to be as painless as possible. It has to be easy to implement and as quickly as possible. And the reason I would like to emphasize as quickly as possible is because you really are also learning as you go, as both as a provider as well as an operator of the different threats you might have. In some cases, the threat could be internal. In some cases, the threat could be external. Most cases, actually, could be both. But you want to have a solution that you can deploy. You can deploy quickly to start at least gathering data and tuning it as you go. That is what I would say summarizes our experience in that field. Solutions that disrupt the network, solutions that take a long time to implement, are all solutions that would not be easily adopted by CIP operators.
Perfect. Next question that came in was, how do we deal with attacks targeted specifically to us? Not too sure
I'll
who's.
take a first pass at that, and we'll build on something that you mentioned before, Sam, which was just on the intelligence aspects of it. I think when looking at targeted attacks, really having some intelligence of what's going on is really important. And I think of intelligence in two different ways. One is internal intelligence that you're developing based on what you're seeing, and in the zero trust model, you're inspecting all the traffic. So you have staff that are looking at the attacks that are coming in. You can determine if they're targeted attacks or not, and start building up a profile on the different attackers that are there, so understand what they do so that you can build some countermeasures to it. But to augment what you're doing internally, right, particularly in this area when we see targeted attacks going after large swaths of the energy sector or different verticals, right, is sharing amongst others, having a vendor that gives you some intelligence themselves, developing your own intelligence, as well as sharing intelligence with your peers and your industry, I think are good ways to try to solve, I don't know that we ever solve the targeted attack problem, but at least minimize the threat from it.
Rick, it's really a great pleasure having you on this one. Rick, I would totally concur with what you said. Um, Targeted attacks are becoming a reality. It's just a fact we have to live with. It's no longer being, Joe Blow out there coming in. It's usually targeted. There is usually an intent and a very well-defined goal in doing so. So I do agree with Rick that you yourself as an operator, you have to put the technology that allows you to do the monitoring and so on. You would need to rely on the vendor. The vendor also needs to be quite open-minded, and this is sort of like a call to all my peers in the industry. We need to join hands and help out because the threats to our nations are very real. It's no longer just, as I said, child's play or kids play. It's as real as it gets. Some of the technology aspects that you could use as well are sandboxing, for example, heuristics. These are always good things. But at the end of the day, it's also the human aspect. Don't give up on. Don't actually overlook that. Having a knowledgeable, vendor, a knowledgeable expert on your team, and also the collection of us as vendors cooperating together as humans, because you would be surprised about the innovation that some of our attackers are having.
Sounds good. I think this question is probably more geared towards Rick. It says, what types of organizations are behind the attacks?
Well, I think you've got a lot of state-sponsored types of attacks. I mean, if you look at Stuxnet as an example, right? There's a state-sponsored one. You also have the hacktivist organizations, and then you also have state-sponsored organizations that perhaps are trying to do false flags to look like they're hacktivists. You clearly also have some of the espionage type ones. Maybe the Telvent's a good example there. I don't know what the in-game one going after that particular application that they got data to was. So I think it's kind of the traditional players that you might think. It's states, could be competitors, hacktivists. I have to say that the threat landscape is pretty overwhelming and pretty broad, which I think is a good reason to try to build out some intelligence capabilities so that you are trying to characterize the type of attackers that are going after you so that you can tailor your response based on the sophistication of the attacker.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Again, this next question, I guess, is probably going to be our last since we're running out of time here. I think it's probably geared towards Rick as well, from a researcher point of view. How often do attacks happen? What is the growth and the threat levels?
I don't know. It's kind of a tough question because I'm an analyst from an analyst firm, right? So I always like to have data around there. So anecdotally, the attacks are definitely increasing. I think one of the challenges from a to actually measure it is that people always don't advertise that they've had an attack. Now, in this space, you might see it a little bit more because there's some kind of maybe Department of Homeland Security oversight over the critical infrastructure here in the U.S. where that might get involved. But a lot of times, people are reticent to actually announce that they've had an attack. So, I think I have to kind of rely on what you see in the media, and certainly you hear about attacks that are on the rise. But I also think in this particular area, there's a lot of things that kind of go on in the classified environments that we may not be privy to as unless you have access to those environments. So I don't know. It's kind of a tough question to ask. I certainly think the threat landscape is much more challenging, and it seems that the attacks are ever increasing. But that's just kind of gut and based on observation, talking to customers and following the media.
I would like to add to Rick's answer here. For those in the audience who are trying to quantify numbers, the engineers in the audience, just to give you a good idea, attacks on enterprises have been growing at close to around 35 or 40%. And however, attacks on mobile devices, the Androids and so on, have been growing nearly at 480% to 600%. The number is in between there, by the way, just to give it, just to summarize it. But the fact is, as we see more vendors considering things such as Android for endpoint controls, or as we see machine to machine, the concern is more on the higher end of the scale, 600 or something percent. Regardless, Rick summarized it very nicely there when he said, probably in a lot of cases we don't get to hear about it. Um, but it's very serious, and not being attacked or not being hacked or anything is no excuse for not taking it seriously, because I always say don't want to be a statistic, or you don't want to be a headline.
Perfect. I think we've got just a couple seconds here for any last comments that either Rick or Husam might have.
Well, I just want to thank everyone for taking time. I know everyone's busy, so I appreciate you joining us today. I think like I said throughout my talk, these environments are the most critical ones and the most challenging ones that are out there to secure. And we really need to overcome some of kind of the cultural challenges in the organizations to get security more involved, to get a seat at the table in these environments. And you really can't understate how important securing these are, because fortunately we haven't seen any public large-scale disasters as a result of this, but certainly the potential is there.
Yeah, Rick, it's great having you with us here on this one. As I always say, it's sometimes objects in the mirror are closer than they appear, or whatever you'd like to have you say there. Fact is, this is a real risk, and we look forward to working with you if you're considering solutions like that. But also, more important, we look forward to hearing from all of those who attended today, because that's how we get to increase the level of intelligence and increase the level of learning of how can we protect our infrastructure better. So thanks for everyone who attended today.
And with that, we want to thank very much to Rick Holland here for presenting his thoughts and views, as well as Husam Kinawi. As mentioned before, I guess an archived version of this webinar will be available from the Wedge Networks website at some point. And if you have any further questions that you'd like answered, feel free to contact us through Wedge Networks, or I think I'm not too sure if Rick is taking questions as well. We can actually just forward any questions that we get through to Rick. But with that, I think we'll wrap up this webinar. Thank you very much for attending, and we look forward to seeing you at our next webinar.